Imagine you are lying awake in a small room above a narrow medieval street, listening to someone cough through the wall. At first, it does not feel like history. It just feels annoying. The kind of sound that keeps pulling you back from sleep right when your body is finally starting to give up. The room is dark, the air is cold, and somewhere below, a horse shifts against the stones like even the animal is tired of this town. Then the coughing changes. It gets wet. It gets deeper. It stops for too long, then comes back harder, like the person on the other side is trying to drag air out of a place where air does not want to be. You stare into the darkness, waiting for someone else in the house to wake up and deal with it, because that is what people do when something feels uncomfortable but not yet important. By morning, the neighbor is dead. That is the terrifying thing about the Black Death. It did not arrive with a dramatic announcement. The sky did not split open. A monster did not walk through the city gate. It arrived like a bad night in one room, then another room, then a whole street that suddenly smelled different. Today, when we hear the word plague, we already know too much. We picture old paintings, strange masks, mass graves, and people ringing bells in empty streets. The word feels ancient, almost theatrical, like something that belongs safely inside a history book. But in 1347 or 1348, depending on where you lived, nobody in a medieval town was thinking, "Wow, we are currently entering one of the worst pandemics in human history." They were thinking about bread. They were thinking about rent. They were thinking about whether the ship that had just arrived brought cloth, spices, or somebody's cousin who owed them money. That is how the nightmare got in. A town in medieval Europe was already a living creature. It breathed through its markets. It sweated through its alleys. It carried the smell of animals, smoke, damp wood, and human bodies packed too close together. People lived above workshops, beside stables, behind taverns, and under church bells that divided the day into pieces everyone understood. Then something entered that rhythm and began to break it. Maybe it started near the port. A merchant had come off a ship looking tired. That would not be strange. Everyone looked tired in the 14th century, bro, because life had not exactly invented comfort yet. He might have blamed the sea air. He might have blamed bad food. He might have gone to bed thinking sleep would fix whatever was wrong. Then the fever came. This is where the story becomes hard to sit with, because the first victims did not know they were warnings. They were just people who felt cold under blankets, then too hot, then terrified when painful swellings appeared under the arms or near the groin. The body was trying to fight something it had never learnt how to fight, and the person inside that body had no language for what was happening. Their family had language, though. They had prayer. They had panic. They had the desperate habit of touching the person they loved, wiping their face, bringing water, leaning close enough to hear their breathing. Every act of care became a risk, but nobody knew that yet. That might be the cruelest doorway into the plague. It used normal human love as a hallway. A mother sits beside a son because leaving him alone feels unthinkable. A wife presses her hand to her husband's forehead because that is what you do when someone burns with fever. A neighbor steps inside because the shouting has gone quiet. Nobody is being foolish. They are being human, and the disease moves through that humanity with perfect patience. By the second night, the town begins to understand that something is wrong, but not what kind of wrong. One death is sad. A few deaths are frightening. A whole street whispering the same story becomes something else. People start noticing patterns without understanding causes. The sick complain of pain. Their skin darkens in places. Some die so quickly that yesterday's conversation feels impossible, like the dead person has slipped out of time before anyone could properly react. The church bells begin to ring more often. At first, bells give shape to grief. They tell the town that a soul has left and that the living should pray. But when the ringing becomes too frequent, it stops feeling holy and starts feeling like a count nobody wants to keep. Each bell tells the same story in a different house. Someone has vanished from the table. Someone has stopped answering. Someone who was warm yesterday has become a body that must be moved, and moving the body becomes its own horror. Medieval people were not stupid. That is a lazy way to talk about the past. They were trapped inside the best explanations available to them. They understood sickness through ideas of bad air, divine punishment, corrupted bodies, unlucky stars, and moral failure. Some explanations were wrong, but the fear underneath them was completely rational. The world really was changing around them. People really were dying too fast. Imagine standing in a town square and realizing nobody agrees on what the danger is. That part of the story gets ugly very quickly because panic does not make people wise. It makes them hungry for certainty, even when certainty points at the wrong target. Meanwhile, the disease keeps moving. It slips through houses where families sleep close together. It follows the paths of trade that once made the town feel connected to the world. The market, which used to be the loudest place in town, begins to lose its normal sound. Fewer people argue over prices. Fewer hands reach for bread. Everybody notices who is missing, but nobody wants to say every name out loud. There is a moment in disasters when the ordinary world does not fully disappear, but it becomes impossible to trust. That is where this town is now. The baker still has an oven, but who kneaded the dough? The well still has water, but who touched the rope? The door across the street still opens, but why has nobody come out since yesterday? The things that made life feel familiar now feel suspicious, because plague turns normal contact into a question. The town begins to pull away from itself. People who once lived almost on top of each other start avoiding each other's eyes. A cough in the street changes the direction of footsteps. A closed window becomes a message. A cart rolling at night makes everyone listen, because by then everyone knows what kind of work happens after dark. This is one reason the Black Death feels more terrifying than many disasters that happen all at once. A fire shows its edge. A flood has a direction. A collapsing building tells you where not to stand. Plague hides inside time. It makes you wait. It lets you wonder whether the danger has already entered your house and is simply being quiet. That waiting destroys people in a different way. You can be healthy in the morning and afraid by sunset because someone you touched yesterday is now sick. You can hear a bell and start counting backward through your own day. Did you stand near that person? Did you share the same cup? Did your sleeve brush their sleeve in the market? Your memory becomes a trap, replaying tiny moments that felt harmless when they happened. The town's leaders try to respond, but response requires understanding. They can close a gate, burn herbs, order prayers, or tell people to stay away from infected houses. Some actions may help a little by accident. Others do nothing except make fear look organized. That is another awful part of human history. Sometimes authority does not have answers, but it still has a loud voice. Doctors arrive where they can, though doctor is a generous word for many of them by modern standards. Some have learning, some have courage, some have both and still cannot stop what is happening. Imagine being the person called into a room where everyone is staring at you like knowledge itself has entered, and deep down, you know your knowledge is too small for the thing in the bed. So the town keeps shrinking. Not physically, because the walls are still there, the church is still there, the streets still twist through the same cramped passages, but socially, emotionally, spiritually, the town collapses inward. Families become islands, houses become borders, the living begin to fear the dead, then fear the sick, then fear each other. And still, life has the nerve to continue in fragments. Someone feeds a child, someone hides a loaf of bread, someone whispers a prayer they have already whispered too many times. These moments matter because they remind us that the Black Death was not only a number, it was not just a percentage of Europe's population disappearing in a few brutal years. It was millions of private endings happening inside rooms where people had names, habits, debts, jokes, and favorite places to sit. That is what statistics erase if we let them. When we say the plague killed perhaps a third or more of Europe, the sentence is so large that the mind protects itself by making it abstract. A third of a continent becomes a shape on a map, but inside one medieval town, it means the man who sharpened knives is gone. The woman who sold onions near the church is gone. The child who used to chase chickens near the wall is gone. A town does not just lose people, it loses the tiny routines that made it feel alive. By the time the plague burns through, the survivors are not the same people who watched the first neighbor die. They have seen too much. They have learned that the world can change without explaining itself. They have discovered that a town can be full of voices one week and full of locked doors the next. When the bells finally slow down, the silence is not peaceful. It is the sound of everyone who is not there anymore. And yet, this is where the story turns in a strange way. Human beings kept going. That does not make the horror smaller. It makes the survival harder to understand. After the plague, people still planted fields. They reopened shops. They married. They argued. They rebuilt pieces of daily life around empty spaces. In some places, labor became more valuable because so many workers were gone. Old systems cracked. The world after the Black Death was wounded, but it was also rearranged. This is why the arrival of the plague in a medieval town is one of the most terrifying stories in human history. It was not just that death came. Death always came in the Middle Ages, and people knew that better than we do. The terror was that death became unpredictable in a new way. It made the familiar world feel infected with doubt. So go back to that first night. You are lying in bed, listening through the wall. The cough sounds bad, but you do not know it is history entering the room next door. You do not know that by the time the town understands the danger, understanding will arrive too late for thousands of people. You only know that the house is dark, the air feels close, and someone nearby is struggling to breathe. That is how the Black Death arrived for most people. Not as a chapter title, not as a famous disaster, not as a black cloak sweeping across Europe. It arrived as a sound in the night that everyone hoped would be better by morning. And then morning came.